This week on Jerusalem Dateline, Israel gets a new government and a new prime minister. But will this government last? And what about the new U.S. administration? Will it stand with Israel? And United Hatzalah, helping Israelis on the front lines. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. This week, Israeli fighter jets struck Hamas targets inside Gaza after the terror group launched dozens of incendiary weapons into southern Israel. The strikes are the first since the end of last month's war between Hamas and Israel. This video shows Hamas terrorists arming arson balloons aimed at southern Israel and designed to create havoc and destroy crops inside Israel. The balloons ignited over 25 fires, and this map shows the number of fires set in 2021. Israel reportedly warned Hamas the situation will escalate if the balloon attacks do not stop. Hamas launched the balloons to protest the annual flag parade in Jerusalem that retraces the steps Israeli paratroopers took to liberate the city in the 1967 Six-Day War. Before the march, Hamas called for a day of rage and warned Israel to stop the event or risk another war. Despite Hamas's threats, the march proceeded, but officials did alter the route so it wouldn't go into the Muslim quarter of the old city. The largely peaceful march included shouts of "The people of Israel live," but was also marred by shouts of "Death to Arabs." New Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid condemned those comments. As a response to the arson balloons, Israeli planes hit Hamas military targets and said it held it responsible for everything that happens inside the Gaza Strip. Israel also deployed Iron Dome anti-missile batteries in the south in case Hamas fired more rockets into Israel. Hamas launched more than 4,000 rockets into Israel last month. The Jerusalem March was the first major test for the new government led by Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. On June 13th, the Knesset voted to ratify the new coalition put together by Yair Lapid. That meant for the first time in 12 years, Benjamin Netanyahu is no longer Prime Minister of Israel and marked an historic sea change in Israeli politics. The new government posed for the traditional picture with Israeli President Reuven Rivlin. By the slimmest of margins, 60 to 59, the Knesset approved the new coalition government. During his speech, incoming Prime Minister Naftali Bennett was heckled constantly by members of the opposition. But Bennett, who was once Netanyahu's ally and now rival, recognized his former boss.
Thank you, Benjamin Netanyahu, for many years of service and lots of achievements for Israel. As Prime Minister, you worked for many years with devotion and to our political and defensive power.
Netanyahu now serves as leader of the opposition and cited how his governments have transformed Israel.
Members of Knesset, our achievements from a marginal state to a rising power in the global arena, this is our way. Mine and my friends from the National Bloc, my friends on the real right. And if it is destined for us to be in the opposition, we will do it with our backs straight until we topple this dangerous government and return to lead the country in our way.
Netanyahu questioned if Bennett would be willing to disagree with U.S. President Biden and vowed he would be back. Bennett now leads a checkerboard coalition of 8 parties representing left, center, right, and for the first time, an Arab Islamist party.
Well, it's true that this government has a very difficult path ahead of it, a narrow parliamentary majority, a very heterogeneous government, and in this respect it will be challenging to keep it together.
Right after the vote, the new government held its first cabinet meeting. It faces daunting challenges at home and threats outside its borders. Still, earlier this year, Bennett told CBN News he was up to the job.
I'm ready to take that responsibility as former defense minister, former entrepreneur and CEO of companies. I think I've got what's necessary to pull Israel out of this hole and sort of go to the next phase of Israel as the startup nation.
While President Joe Biden congratulated Bennett, differences between the two allies on the Iranian nuclear deal may test the new government.
The renewal of the nuclear agreement with Iran is a mistake that will give legitimacy again to one of the darkest and most violent regimes in the world. Israel will not let Iran arm itself with a nuclear weapon. Israel is not part of the deal and will continue to maintain full freedom of action.
After 4 elections and more than 2 years of political paralysis, it remains to be seen if this new government will provide the stability many Israelis are hoping for. CBN founder Pat Robertson asked former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo about Israel's new government on the 700 Club.
You know, Israel struck Hamas targets in Gaza last night. They've had more provocations. Do you think we're looking at some kind of a war over there? How do you take this new government they put in place?
Well, Pat, I'm very worried about that. Look, the new government on the security side, I think they'll be okay. Naftali Bennett is a conservative. He understands that he has to protect Israel and defend it. He knows that this is the central thesis of the state's security function. So I think they'll be okay, but that coalition is going to be a mess to govern. But just as importantly, the United States has separated itself from Israel these past 140 plus days now. The backing of Iran by going to Vienna, by saying we're going to go re-enter this deal and give the Iranians billions of dollars, gives courage to terrorists like Hamas, gives courage to terrorists like Hezbollah, and more importantly, gives them the money and missiles to create exactly the kind of havoc we saw a few weeks back now. We had it right. We built out these amazing accords for peace with Arab states. We made clear Iran wasn't going to have the resources it needed to foment terror, and that America would be a partner with Israel, whether that was moving our embassy to Jerusalem or saying that Israel has the right to the Golan Heights. Those are the kind of things that bad guys, Iranians and terrorists understand, and American weakness will make life really difficult for the Israelis, and it'll make the important American interest there less secure.
Up next, is the new U.S. administration strong enough to stand up to the challenges in the Middle East and around the world?
Now, for a limited time, you can get 5 of CBN's critically acclaimed documentaries. Experience the rebirth of the modern state of Israel.
The historic bond between the Jewish people and the land of Israel cannot be broken.
Relive the battle for Jerusalem in the Six-Day War.
Jerusalem is yours, forever.
Discover how Israeli volunteers are changing the world.
When people need us, we volunteer and we come and help.
Explore the world of Israeli technological innovation.
We're people of dreams. God gives us dreams. And that's really the roots, I think, of much of our innovation.
And understand the biggest land dispute in history.
Many Palestinian Arabs claim that the Jews stole Arab land. But is that the real story?
This exclusive Israel DVD collection can be yours for a gift of $40 or more. Call now or go online to get your Israel DVD bundle today.
Watch breaking news, in-depth exclusive stories and programs from health to entertainment you won't find anywhere else. The CBN News Channel, a perspective you can trust. Enjoy credible news reporting from around the world. Discover inspiring programs and stories of hope, all in one place from a Christian perspective. The CBN News Channel, a perspective you can trust. To watch the CBN News Channel, download the app or visit cbnnewschannel.com.
The Bible tells us to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. In CBN's free guide, 10 Ways You Can Pray for Israel, you'll learn spiritual lessons from Israel's patriarchs, prophets, and beloved New Testament leaders, while also discovering how you can pray for Israel today. Get your free copy. Call 1-800-700-7000 or go to cbn.com/pray-for-Israel.
President Biden held a crucial summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Even before that meeting, critics of the administration say its policies are projecting a perception of weakness to America's enemies. Dale Hurd has more.
At the G7, Joe Biden announced America is back as a world leader. But some believe his administration's policies are making the world more dangerous. Biden entered the White House set to ride a post-COVID economic boom and correct what Democrats consider Donald Trump's reckless foreign policy. But after a series of setbacks at home and abroad, Biden has been dubbed the master of disaster, who is taking America back to the dark days of Jimmy Carter. High gasoline prices and inflation have returned at home, but critics say far more problematic is the perception among our enemies abroad that America is weak again. As Joe Biden makes good on his promise to roll back Donald Trump's foreign policy, it certainly doesn't feel as if it has made America or the world safer. North Korea greeted the new administration in March by firing missiles into the Sea of Japan. The White House response was basically, don't do that again. That same month, China mocked and humiliated the U.S. delegation at a summit held on U.S. soil. The White House has decided to reopen talks with Tehran over the Iran nuclear deal and even lifted some economic sanctions, which some experts say will increase the chances of a future war between Iran and Israel. And it resumed hundreds of millions of dollars in U.S. aid to the Palestinians, 1 month before Hamas fired rockets into Israel.
And every one of those rockets might as well have Joe Biden's name written on the side of it, because it is his weakness, his appeasement, his moral relativism and ambiguity, his lack of backbone to stand up and stand with Israel that is causing this war in the Middle East.
Frank Gaffney was an Undersecretary of Defense in the Reagan administration, which had to rebuild America's foreign policy after the disastrous Jimmy Carter era.
I would describe Joe Biden's foreign policy as basically Barack Obama's on steroids. I mean, think about this. A little over 100 days ago, Israel was in a totally different position than it is now. And that's 100% because of the Biden foreign policy mistakes.
The White House has also decided to cancel America's Keystone Pipeline and 10,000 jobs, while allowing the completion of Russia's Nord Stream pipeline to Western Europe, something former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Sunday the Trump administration would have never allowed.
We made clear that that pipeline was not going to be completed. It would not have been completed had we had 4 more years. I'm very, very confident of that.
Many Republican senators are also showing concern over changes the Biden administration is making to Middle East policies, particularly when it comes to Israel. In a letter to the president, lawmakers led by Senator James Lankford are urging the president to take a firmer stand with this key ally. CBN News Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson takes a closer look at the specific policies the group finds so troubling.
Senator James Lankford says when it comes to U.S. support for Israel, the Biden administration is sending mixed messages, and he argues we need to reaffirm our commitment rather than distancing ourselves.
We stand with Israel, their ally, and America is opposed to terrorism.
One concern is the Biden administration's decision to reopen a Palestinian consulate in Jerusalem.
That's an important way for our country to engage with and provide support to the Palestinian people.
Lankford argues it sends the wrong message.
Our embassy is in Jerusalem. That's the focus there. Obviously, the Jewish state is their main headquarters, their Knesset. All their leadership offices are in Jerusalem. That should be a focus. So I have a real concern that sends a mixed message from the United States.
Add to that message plans to reopen a PLO mission here in Washington. Lankford worries that could potentially have a negative impact on fighting terror.
Though I've worked very hard to be able to allow victims of terrorism that are Americans to also hold Palestinian leadership accountable in American courts. And the connection there is if they base any of the Palestinian efforts here in the United States and have a headquarters here in the United States, American families are able to sue Palestinians for damages and for loss for the acts of terrorism that have been carried out against some of these families.
Lankford fears the administration is trying to find a way around that.
And definitely shouldn't send a mixed message to American families that are victims of terrorism that they're not going to be able to get their day in court.
Secretary of State Blinken also recently announced $30 million in U.S. tax dollars will go to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees.
I do not believe we should have restored the funding to that UN organization that handles refugees. They handle refugees in the Palestinian areas different than they handle refugees anywhere else in the world.
Even Blinken recently acknowledged the UN group spreads anti-Semitic education materials, erasing Israel from maps.
We need to make sure the schools are actually not teaching hatred and bigotry to the next generation.
And Langford argues the group is not working to resettle the Palestinian refugees.
And the UN will not allow the Palestinians to be able to integrate in other areas, because the theory is that they're going to move back to Israel and they're going to take over Israel in the future. That's absurd. Their focus there is to be able to drive the Jews out of Israel and have that not be a Jewish state anymore. That's not going to happen and should not happen. But that UN organization seems to be focused on that issue.
The Biden administration, however, insists support for Israel is strong.
Our stalwart support, our ironclad support for Israel will remain.
Republicans are also concerned with the Biden administration's plans to rejoin the Iran nuclear deal, arguing Iran is funding terrorist enemies of Israel like Hamas and Hezbollah. Reporting from Virginia, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Coming up, the danger the Islamic Republic of Iran poses to Israel, the Middle East, and the world.
His story has inspired the world for thousands of years.
Israel's most famous king.
While some scholars doubted his very existence.
You cannot claim that King David is a mythological figure.
Journey deep beneath the ancient city of Jerusalem and see proof of Israel's celebrated hero. Get Written in Stone, House of David. Join host Gordon Robertson on an expedition through the evidence supporting the Old Testament.
Extraordinary discoveries made headlines around the world.
See where the shepherd boy slew the mighty giant.
We are shedding some light on the story of David and Goliath.
Explore the relics of the Davidic age.
There was a significant structure standing here.
And discover proof of King David's legacy.
This is a royal house.
Written in Stone, House of David can be yours for any dollar amount. Call 1-800-700-7000 or go to cbn.com. Available now.
Here, we're committed to a heritage of rigorous scholarship dating back over 1,000 years. And to a faith tradition dating back 1,000 more.
This is how we create a culture of inquiry where no topic is off limits. And a culture of hope.
Anything's possible!
It's Christian leadership.
And it's changing the world for the better.
It's higher learning.
It's greater knowing.
It's what makes us whole.
It's what makes us Regent.
On June 18th, Iranians went to the polls to elect Iran's next president. While the results were not known as we tape this edition of Jerusalem Dateline, many experts believe it's a crucial election to determine the future of the Islamic Republic.
The next president of Iran, and most Iranian presidents are reelected, will most likely be at the helm during Iran's most important political transition in 30 years. And that will be the sort of passing and death of Ali Khamenei and the nomination and the political transition towards a new supreme leader.
Middle East expert and editor-in-chief of All Israel News, Joel Rosenberg, told CBN News Iran still poses the greatest threat to the region.
Iran is more dangerous today than ever before, and they are dangerously close to building not just one nuclear warhead, but an entire arsenal. They have also built out their ballistic missile force, not only to be able to reach here in Israel, but to be able to reach Europe, and they're getting closer to being able to reach the United States with intercontinental ballistic missiles. And Iran's alliances, their alliances are more dangerous than ever. They've built this really close strategic alliance with Russia, with Turkey, with North Korea, and increasingly with China. Now, each of those alliances look a little different, but they are dramatically stronger. Iran's regime is dramatically stronger today because they have these anti-American, anti-Western, and very hostile enemies as their allies. And several of those countries, of course, are nuclear armed themselves, which makes the Iranian nuclear threat even more dangerous.
And plus, they built up proxies throughout the region. Iranian militias in Iraq, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis down in Yemen as well.
That's right.
Almost surrounding Israel, as well as some of the Sunni Arab nations.
That's right. And I think that the countries that have allied themselves with Iran's regime, Russia, North Korea, China, increasingly Turkey, I don't think they understand who they're in bed with. You know, I think all of those leaders in all of those countries believe they are using Iran to poke in the eye of the United States and to mess with Israel and the Western alliances. I don't think that these leaders and nations believe that Iran is setting the agenda, that Iran is setting the pace, that Iran has genocidal ambitions, right? The Iranian leadership doesn't want to just improve their position in the region. Iran's leadership are driven by an end times radical, apocalyptic eschatology that believes that at the right moment, the Ayatollahs will be able to annihilate Israel, this country, which they call the Little Satan, and that's only their first objective. Ultimately, they want to annihilate, not just humble, but annihilate, destroy the United States, which they call the Great Satan. And I don't think Putin or the Chinese leadership or Recep Erdogan in Turkey, I don't think any, the great leader in Pyongyang, North Korea, I think they are seeing Iran as part of an anti-Western, anti-American alliance. Let's just get everybody who hates America and hates the West, let's get them all in one big semi-unhappy family. I don't think they realize exactly who they're in bed with when it comes to the Iranian regime.
Up next, the men and women who ran to the front lines when millions of Israelis were in harm's way. Thank you for watching Jerusalem Dateline. We're committed to providing you with unbiased reporting from the Holy Land. Through weekly broadcasts, podcasts, and online media, our vision is to reach millions around the globe with the true story of what's happening in Israel and the Middle East, all from a biblical and prophetic perspective. This is a big vision and is only made possible by the generous support of people like you.
Call us toll-free at 1-800-700-7000 or go to cbn.com/Jerusalem Dateline and make a donation that will help spread the light of truth about Israel throughout the world.
Chris?
God wants the life you live to bring others closer to Him.
Ever want to come to one of our Bible study meetings?
2 stories about being a witness for the Lord. Explorer Volume 28. Join the Superbook Club today and get this exciting new DVD, plus 2 copies to share with others, all for your gift of only $25. Each DVD contains 2 special versions of your favorite Superbook episodes, Baptized and Jesus, Friend of Sinners, plus 2 Bible background videos exploring the history of each Bible story, 2 signpost videos revealing how each Superbook story points to the Messiah, Jesus Christ. There's also a How to Draw video, featuring techniques for drawing John the Baptist from an award-winning artist, and even a special music video. Your young ones will experience the excitement of living in ancient times while gaining a deeper understanding of God's truths. Superbook Club members' free streaming for seasons 1 through 5 is now available.
Orphans Promise is committed to loving and serving at-risk children, to helping keep families together, and to creating opportunities for strong and sustainable communities around the world. We're working in over 60 countries, and with your help, we can do even more. We are out to change the world, one child, one family, one community at a time. Will you join us?
Hey, if you're tired and exhausted all day, you can't think clearly, and you really just need a cup or even a pot of coffee to get through your day, then join me, Dr. Josh Axe, for this new series where I'm going to teach you how to transform your diet and use essential oils and supplements to get a better night's sleep.
Wake up to your best life. Call 1-800-700-7000 to get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
During the recent war between Hamas and Israel, millions of Israelis lived in the line of fire. The men and women of one organization went into harm's way while the rockets fell to help those in need.
My name is Gabby Friedson. I'm a medic with United Hatzalah, and I am here right now in State Road, where just a few minutes ago a rocket directly hit this home right here. As you can see, it penetrated the house.
Gabby Friedson serves as the U.S. spokesman for United Hatzalah, Israel's largest volunteer emergency service. They strive to respond to emergencies within 3 minutes, and Friedson, like dozens of other volunteers, raced to the front lines during the war between Hamas and Israel.
And we were able to respond to any rocket that had a direct hit or from any injuries from shrapnel.
During the war, Hamas fired more than 4,000 rockets into South and Central Israel.
The entire country was almost taken hostage, making sure that they were very in close proximity to a bomb shelter, just in case a rocket falls.
A direct missile, direct hit in Ashkelon on a car, a lot of shrapnel all around.
Like millions of Israelis, they too had to run for shelter as sirens wailed. For Israelis next to the border, 10 seconds is about all they have to seek shelter when the alarm sounds.
Being down south, I got a whole new look at 10 seconds. Being able to run in 10 seconds, go into the bathroom and only having 10 seconds. This is a way of life for the people of the down south for a long time.
The co-founder of United Hatzalah, Mark Gerson, told CBN's George Thomas how much the organization helped Israelis under fire during the war.
We're doing that because our brethren in Israel, the people we love in Israel, are being attacked by Hamas terrorists from the south. And the heroes of United Hatzalah are rushing into the fire to help their neighbors in need.
CBN News has reported on United Hatzalah in the past when we rode with them through the streets of Jerusalem. Their ambucycles allow them to reach the scene of an emergency within 3 minutes.
It's an extremely effective system. The most precious moments following a trauma are the first 3 minutes that separate life from death. Consequently, on a normal day, when we're doing 1,900 calls a day, we're able to save about 200 lives a day, and that's multiplied during this crisis.
They know they're fighting an enemy with a goal of genocide.
They scream at the top of their lungs that they would like to see Israel be annihilated and completely gone from the earth and washed into the sea. I mean, this is part of their rhetoric.
Despite the danger, they choose life.
Every day, our medics in United Hatzalah have a love for life that I've never seen before. I get to feel it every single day. That's what we do. We spend our time trying to save lives. But being down south with rockets flying over your head, it just boosts that feeling of your appreciation of every single day as a blessing.
United Hatzalah is an amazing organization. Well, that's all for this edition. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. You can also access CBN content through our CBN News and other CBN apps. And don't forget to sign up for our email blast so you can continue to receive all of our exciting CBN content. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.